All right, so good morning again, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Joanna Mackay. I introduced myself this morning as well. I am the coordinator of the Inclusive Schools Network, as well as the co-chair for the Special Needs Network of Anglophone Professionals, and we love our acronyms in education, so that one we call SNAP. We're so glad to have you here for today's block, led by Stephanie Stollar, called What Does It Take to Change a System? 5 Actions That Get Results. So just before we introduce our guest, we'll have a few quick items to make the session run smoothly. So please note that the session will be recorded and all participants' cameras and microphones can be your cameras can be open if you have your mic off, and if you want to ask a question, to raise your hand and then open your microphone. The chat is open and monitored, so if you have rather ask your questions through the chat, you can do that at any time. Dr. Stoller said she'll take questions as we go. So if you have a question, you can put your hand up or put a question in the chat, and she or I will get to you when appropriate. And so there also is live captions available. You just click CC live transcript to turn them on. Admitting people here as well. And all right, so without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Stollar. I won't go too deep because we just did the keynote with her, but as you know, she works to support educators to improve reading outcomes by learning about and implementing the science of reading in an MTSS framework. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we're really excited to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanna. And thanks to all of you who decided to spend another 90 minutes talking about this topic. You are definitely my people. I'm glad to have so many of you here wanting to dig deeper into multi-tiered system of supports. And as Joanna said, feel free to ask questions throughout because this presentation is really geared towards administrators. The specific actions that I think are important for you to take in your role. And the content will just go deeper into what I introduced in the keynote. So this is your chance to, dig under the hood a little bit, to ask questions, to get clarification of anything that was introduced in the previous session. So just to dive in here, I want to return to this idea of random acts of improvement. This is maybe a little harsh way of describing what I see happening around the US right now. And that is either legislation or at the state policy level, separate actions that are being mandated without a coherent framework holding them together. So there's nothing wrong with adopting a new program. That might be an appropriate action. Nothing wrong with providing professional development. There's certainly nothing wrong with doing universal screening. I think it's essential. But without having a way to hold those things together and link them to student outcomes, they just become these random compliance activities. And the bottom line is they're not moving the needle. People are doing the things that they've been told that they have to do, but it's not resulting in better outcomes for students. So the message that I have for you as school leaders is that we have to pay attention to going beyond telling people what to do and make the conditions right for them to do the new things. So this presentation is really all about that system of support and getting the conditions right for educators to perhaps take a bold step into something that is different for them, to take on some new learning, to support students in a different way. This is going to take your leadership because it means doing business differently. And, nobody likes to change, especially nobody likes to be told to change. So we have to get the conditions right so that everybody is moving together voluntarily and in unison, all in support of student outcomes. That's the bottom line. So I want to start, first, before we dive in here, just reminding everyone to make sure that they're audio is muted when they enter the meeting. Just a quick check to turn off your microphone if it's on when you enter. Cameras can be on, that's great, but mute your audio if you would. Okay, so I do have the chat open and I would love to hear your thoughts about anything that resonated with you in the keynote, assuming you were able to attend. Anything that was slightly different in my presentation from the way that you have previously thought about or seen MTSS implemented. Just drop a quick comment in the chat. This will get our chatting warmed up. Anything new or slightly different from the way that I presented this MTSS model from the way it's being implemented in your district or places where you have worked previously? Anything that's a slight difference? Thank you, Tiffany. Getting the ball rolling here. Everybody else is invited to also play along from home. Okay, some feedback on the graphics. Great. So it's good to know that we've sparked some different thinking here. I know many of you administrators are multitasking as you're attending the conference, but yeah, the focus on tier one, not a student issue if the student isn't making progress. It's a systems issue. Adapting our tier one instruction, not going straight to tier two. Excellent. All tiers are for all students. Prevention focus. Excellent. Very good. Okay, I'm going to keep my eye on that as we go along. Thank you. That's helpful feedback for me, but also just gets you a little bit warmed up in terms of participating. So here are the actions I'm going to focus on. 5 actions that are important for administrators, and I'm going to go one by one through these, not in any order of priority, but just to give us a way to structure the content here. And as I do this, I'm going to go deeper into the topics that were introduced this morning, but mostly as a way for you to ask for clarification and questions. In my experience, folks who end up as school or district or board administrators weren't necessarily always elementary teachers or elementary leaders in some capacity. You may not have ever taught anyone to read. You might not be familiar with reading, how it develops, what can go wrong in that process, or familiar with reading intervention. So I think one of the very first things we need to do is acknowledge and recognize that it's very difficult to lead something that you don't have deep knowledge about. And my favorite administrators are the ones who admit this like straight up from the beginning. So I wanted to highlight and elevate this at the start of the presentation. One of the most important actions that you can take initially is to understand where is your own level of knowledge about the science of reading. I walked through this list of 5 extremely briefly this morning in the keynote, but I want to go deeper into each one to round out your understanding of each one, but to give you a way of self-assessing. Which of these aspects of the reading research do you personally need to get some more support to learn, to grow your own knowledge around? If you're going to build a system that's built on these foundational concepts from the science of reading, it's important for you to know about them. So first of all, this idea that reading isn't natural. This is my non-anatomically correct, not to scale picture of the brain, just to give you a sort of representation of what has to happen to turn a brain that has evolved for spoken language into a brain that can process print. The main connections that need to be built with early instruction are between the system that does exist at birth for spoken language and the system for recognizing print, which actually is a repurposing of the visual word form area. It evolved for facial recognition, and we have to repurpose it for print. And so we're making a 3-way connection here with our instruction between the sounds in the spoken words, and that's at the level of the phoneme in any language, connecting the phonemes to the printed symbols, the graphemes, letters or individual letters or groups of letters that represent the sounds, and the meaning of the word. So this three-way connection is what our instruction in Tier 1 and intervention needs to center on, whether we are teaching students to read in English or any other alphabetic language. Reading, as some have said, is bolted onto print. I think it was Steven Pinker who said it's parasitic on language. I said that wrong previously. It's not bolted onto print, it's bolted onto language. It's this unnatural act of layering print on top of language. So that means you have to have language on which to bolt your print, to layer on the print. All reading and writing is dependent upon spoken language in the language of your home or any other language that you are learning to read in. This is contrary to what many educators have been told. Things like give students the gift of time. When they're ready, the literacy will emerge. That we just need to bathe students in good books. We need to make them comfortable, have them selecting books that they love, and that is what promotes literacy. We maybe used to think that. Some people used to think that, back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But now that we can scan brains, we know that that is not true. And in fact, if we wait for the literacy to emerge for students, we will wait too long, to the point where it becomes very, very difficult to actually have students acquire literacy. So that's big idea and big finding in the research, number one. Number two is about the simple view of reading. As I said, the simplicity of this framework is that there are only two domains that students must master in order to understand what they read: word recognition and language comprehension. And that no amount of one can compensate for lack of skill in the other. If you have a 0.9 word recognition and a 0.9 language comprehension, your reading comprehension will not be fully functioning. And so it is up to us from the very beginning of instruction to equip students with high levels of capacity and skill in both of these domains. From them flow what were the findings of the National Reading Panel report. These 5 essential skills. These form the priorities for instruction and for assessment. If I have an older student who's struggling to understand grade level text, there's only 3 possible reasons for it. They're lacking word recognition, or they're lacking language comprehension, or both. I know exactly what to assess. I can cut through a lot of noise. I don't need to measure every single grade level standard or objective. I can focus in on the place where reading research has converged. And I can conceptualize or think about a schema of supporting young students through a progression of skills from left to right on this graphic, or working backwards for those older students who are not understanding grade level text. I can investigate their oral language skills, I can investigate their word recognition skills, and I can make a plan for identifying where does it break down for them, and then take their instruction back to that earlier place, intervene on that earlier skill, and work explicitly and urgently to get them caught up. So this is sort of a known framework for thinking about preventing reading difficulties and intervening when they happen. This can help you as a school leader organize supports within your system. You're going to have instruction in the early grades around oral language, phonemic awareness, and basic phonics. And you're going to have intervention systems for older students who are struggling with grade level reading comprehension. Third big idea in the reading research is the one that I find to be the most difficult for in-service educators, existing educators, to accept and take on. So you are going to struggle to lead folks in this direction. I can bet money on it because I see it over and over again. Many educators are told from their prep program that reading is natural and that instruction, therefore, should guide students gently and loosely, that it would, in fact, be reductionist or overbearing to segment out skills into component tasks and teach those skills directly and explicitly. They are told in almost every case, including student or educators who are working in a special ed capacity, they are told that it's their role to foster a love of reading and that it would be damaging if they intervened in this natural process. So this is very hard to undo, and it's very hard to convince teachers that this is not the case. But there are decades of research where these two approaches to instruction have been put side by side, what you might call a more constructivist or minimally guided approach with a more direct and explicit approach. And when it comes to students who are new to learning any content, including students in high school who are learning new vocabulary terms in a biology class, or new because this is their first literacy instruction, direct and explicit instruction works best. You're going to run up against this sort of belief-based approach to instruction, and you're going to need to be prepared with the resources to counteract this. The Evidence Advocacy Center is one place where you can find information about this topic. You can find some good resources that summarize this research. What is meant by direct and explicitly fully guided instruction are the bullets that I've included here, where we are taking the complexity of literacy, breaking it down into manageable chunks, ordering and sequencing those skills from easier to harder, simple to complex, directly modeling, telling students what we want them to do, providing supported practice so that they do it correctly, immediately correcting any errors that are made, practicing the newly learned skills to automaticity, not just to accuracy, but to automaticity and mastery, and engaging students in that process, not as the end point on its own, but engaging in terms of giving the instructor feedback. If the student is responding, that is for the purpose of the student to be able to tell the instructor if they're getting the answer right or not. Using routines that free up the instructor's cognitive load allow students to focus on the skill at hand. This is what Joe Torgerson called errorless learning, leaving nothing to chance. This is the instruction that is essential in the context of the beginning reader or the older struggling reader. So for administrators, actions that I would suggest that you engage in related to knowledge of the science of reading: do a self-assessment, do an audit. What is your own level of understanding of the science of reading, starting with even just these few elements of it that I've mentioned. It will also be your responsibility to audit the knowledge of your staff and your broader community. Don't forget that if you are changing your school-based instruction to be more aligned with the research, that is a change for your family members and community members as well. So bring them along on this learning journey. Make sure that you have established not a one-time science of reading training, but ongoing professional development, let's say for the next 3 to 5 years, and that you have a way of coaching your staff to implement instructional practices that are consistent with the research. This doesn't have to be somebody who is formally in the role of coach. You might be the one who is working to install practices that are based in this knowledge, or you might have a system where somebody else is in that coaching role. But this is not a one and done. This is not a esoteric scholarly endeavor. The important piece is delivering the new knowledge through instruction in the classroom. Okay, so action number 2 of 5 is to get your teams in place. And this might be the first thing that you do, even before auditing your own knowledge of the science of reading. I proposed this sort of interconnected cascade of teams in the keynote session. This is what I think is necessary for a fully functioning and integrated, coherent system of reading improvement. If everybody in the system is not working together and working in the same ways towards the same goals, you are going to work at cross purposes. You are not going to use your limited resources most efficiently and effectively. So the sort of first order of business is to, establish a priority. This literacy improvement is our most important goal, and we are all going to be working together to make that happen. What I didn't mention in the keynote is that these systems of teaming are related to each other and communicating with each other. So that's what's meant by the arrows. Student teams are communicating to grade level teams. Grade level teams are feeding information up to the building team. Building team is communicating with the district team, and vice versa. So that everybody within the system, including family members and community members, know what's going on in each level of teams and has a mechanism for speaking into each of these levels of teams as appropriate. So let's talk through who's on each of these teams and what their primary responsibilities would be. And you can make a connection to the teams that currently exist in your system, and you can start to audit which teams do you not even have formed within your system. So in my experience, district leadership teams are at the highest level within your school board, if you're in Canada. They include the central office administrators. They include representation from every school. So a principal, the principal or assistant principal from each school within the system is part of the district leadership team. There is one or more teacher who is representing all teachers on the district leadership team. So maybe that's a teacher from each grade level. That seems to work well. There is representation from what I call related services. You might have a different term for this, but all of the people who are not classroom teachers, special ed staff, MLL staff, resource staff, SLPs, everybody who's ancillary and not a classroom teacher. Somebody needs to represent that group of folks. Somebody needs to represent your non-certificated staff, your school secretaries, your janitorial service, your bus drivers, non-certificated staff. Somebody or multiple somebodies needs to represent them on the district team. If you have a collective bargaining unit, somebody from that union needs to be representing the entire union or unions on the district team. And someone or someone's needs to represent parents, family members, and your local community. This is not for them to be speaking about their own child. This is for them to be the sort of messenger between, so that the needs of the local community and family members are front and center in the district planning, and so that families and community members have a point person that they can go to. So somebody is in that role representing families and community members. Their job on the district team is to do that problem-solving process to get the barriers out of the way to meet the district literacy goals. If you currently have 40% of your first graders reading by the end of the year, your goal would be to get to 80% by the end of the year. Having that clearly articulated goal at the district level helps everybody organize themselves in the same direction. One of the important tasks of the district leadership team is to do a scan of district policies and budget and see where there's inconsistency with the district goals. if your goal is to increase the percentage of first graders who are on track at the end of first grade, but you have policies that are in the way of that, like a policy that says that this educator with a certain title can only work with students with a certain criteria. That kind of policy is going to work against you. So the district team is scanning and looking for opportunities to get those barriers out of the way and to establish policies and resources for the schools to do their jobs. So, school or building leadership teams include a representative from the district team. Now, that could be the building principal, it could be you if you are a principal. You could serve in both roles, but you also need to have representation from every role that I mentioned previously. You have to have classroom teachers represented on the building team. You have to have related service folks. You have to have non-certificated staff represented on the building leadership team. And you need representation from your families and local communities. So it could be that the elementary team family representative is the same person on the district team, or it could be different people. Doesn't matter. The job of the building leadership team is to use the same structured problem-solving process at the building level to create an action plan for this school to help the district meet their literacy goals. The job of the building leadership team is to listen to the grade level teams, each grade within the school, as they are identifying barriers to improved reading outcomes and talking about how the building team could eliminate those barriers. So they're doing that gap identification and gap analysis process to get the conditions right for every teacher to be maximally effective in their classroom. That is the job of all the rest of us in the educational system. And this is the forum in which we have those conversations, a building leadership team. These folks typically meet monthly once the system is up and running. I've found it to be helpful to meet at least every other week in the first year of implementing MTSS. Some schools choose to have their building team meet every week as they're first getting established. The grade level team is the real workhorse of the entire MTSS framework. This is where the real work is happening, is grade level teams. So obviously, all the teachers who work at that grade level are part of the team. If you are in a high school or junior high setting, these could be content area teams. Some secondary schools have both grade level teams and content area teams. That's fine as long as you have a communication system. Teachers are part of the team, but everybody else who serves that grade level is also represented on the grade level team. That includes interventionists, special educators, related service personnel, and somebody from the school level leadership needs to sit on each one of the grade level teams. In some schools, this means the principal goes to every one of the grade level team meetings. In other schools, they might designate somebody as a lead teacher who serves in this capacity, or you might have somebody like an SLP who can serve in this capacity, or a coach or an interventionist. It doesn't matter, but somebody has to be the eyes and ears of the building principal, if it's not them, sitting on each grade level team meeting. They are often the person who is facilitating the action planning process among the team members. And it's nice when that's a consistent person because then they get lots and lots of practice in how to facilitate those meetings. Their job is to identify the barriers to more effective classroom reading instruction. How are we going to improve Tier 1 so that it reduces the number of students who need intervention to something like 20%? So that is their job. They are talking about flexible use of adult resources. They're talking about curriculum and instruction. They're talking about what Tier 2 and 3 systems are needed for that grade level. They are designing, implementing, and evaluating an intervention for their grade level. That's the job of the grade level team. And student teams are what you're already familiar with. So, not going to spend a lot of time here, except to say the same cycle of inquiry, the same database decision making process that's used at the district, school, and grade level team meeting is what's used during a student conversation. Now, just to elevate the importance of communication, I want to bring this to your attention so that you make sure as you're setting up a system of teaming that there is a way to communicate within teams. So how will each member of the team communicate with each other? And how will each team communicate with people who are not on the team? So how will the meeting notes and the agendas and the action plans from the teams at each level be communicated out to everybody else in the system? You don't want to be in the situation where decisions get made in a meeting and somebody's in the parking lot having a disgruntled conversation because they don't like the decision that you made. You will run into that over and over and over and over again if you don't engage people in collaborative decision making. And that can't happen unless you have a system of communication. Okay, so your action as a school or board level administrator is to form this series of teams. I would recommend, if this is your level of work, that you start with a building leadership team. And that building leadership team helps get the grade level teams up and functioning. If you're already in a school where they're using professional learning communities or PLCs as a grade level forum for conversation, you should just repurpose that existing team. You should elevate it to be used for this reading improvement effort. The job of you as a school leader and administrator is to figure out how to get everybody trained in the collaborative improvement cycle. We're going to talk more about that next. But to make sure that everybody is learning and using the same system of asking and answering questions to write action plans, and that you have established a communication system among the teams within your system. Okay, I'm watching the chat for questions and I don't see any now, but I want to pause and invite them. So I know you were invited to raise your hand if you want to unmute with a question before we move forward. So this is an opportunity for you to type in the chat or unmute with a question while I take a sip of water. Not a single question or clarification needed. Okay. All right, we're going to move on to action number 3. Learn and practice the
Stephanie,
collaborative. Oh,
someone
good.
does
There is
have a
one.
couple questions in the chat. The first one is, I'm curious to know more about systems of communication. And then Anjali followed up with any recommendations regarding the most effective way to communicate.
Yeah, I've seen a variety of communication systems. Um, One way to do it these days that's really efficient is to have a Google site with a system of Google Docs for note taking that is accessible to everybody in your system, staff and family and community members, so that people see the topics that are coming up on the next meeting and they have a process for contributing to that. Maybe there's a point person who they send their input to, and everybody can see the meeting notes after a meeting. And they can see that for all levels of the system, what's going on at the grade level that their child is in, what's happening at the district level, and so on. I've seen more sophisticated, perhaps, use of technology, uh, things like group texting. So everybody in the team is on a group text or in a group in a WhatsApp or a Skype communication system, ways that team members have a channel for communication using technology with each other. That those systems are typically not shared outside of the team, but just for the internal team communication. Sending the communication on regular intervals is a task that gets assigned to somebody early on. You'll see mention of that in the book that Sarah Brown and I wrote in those meeting agendas and data protocols. Somebody has to be given the job and it has to be calendared and scheduled. Otherwise, it's easy for it to go by the wayside. So make that one of your team roles to distribute the agenda before each meeting and to distribute the notes after each meeting. Having just an email system is a really efficient way to do that. So hopefully that gives you a variety of ideas to think about there. Okay, let's talk about action number 3 for administrators to take. And this involves what you're doing during your team meetings. That is working your way through the collaborative improvement cycle, or what some folks call problem-solving process. Or when I used to work for Acadience calls this the outcomes-driven model. If you're familiar with the support provided from the MTSS Center at AIR, they call this data-based decision-making or data-based individualization when you're talking about individual students. Whatever you call it, have a system that is consistent within all teams, district to student level. Everybody's using exactly the same process. If we're in a meeting, we are asking, how are we defining the gap? How are we analyzing the gap? What is our action plan? Did our adult actions and student outcomes improve as a result of our action planning? We're all thinking about reading improvement in the same way and talking about our student needs with the same set of questions. So here's where we link the steps to the question that's asked at each step. So gap identification is defined very concretely in an observable and measurable way. It's not saying something like, we need to improve our reading scores, or even, we need to get our comprehension scores up. This is a very specific difference between the desired outcome and the actual performance. So for example, using Acadience as a screening illustration, the scores on Acadience are the minimum expectations. So our expectation is 100% of students would reach the Acadience benchmark goals, but the actual level of performance might be 25%, or it might be 60%. What is the gap between expected and actual performance? In many cases, there is a strong pull to jumping straight from naming the problem to doing something about it. Educators are busy. You're overloaded. You're action-oriented. You want to see results. You might be inclined to jump over the second step, which is gap analysis. And I want to caution you strongly to resist that temptation. We fall easily into habits of doing things that are familiar and comfortable. We fall easily into habits of chasing shiny objects. We hear about some new instructional routine and all of a sudden we're giving it to everybody. I'm guilty of that. I talked about that in the book that Kate Wynn and I wrote about reading assessment. Once I learned about repeated reading and how it improves fluency results, I wanted everybody to have repeated reading. When I learned about peer tutoring, everybody in my school got a peer tutor. Like, it's a natural thing that you jump straight to the action. But what you're doing there is taking a big chance that there's a disconnect, and you're taking a chance that your system doesn't have the capacity to actually implement that action. Many people are talking these days about implementation science. There's a lot of connection between implementation science and MTSS, and this is one of the places for that connection. Let's just say you have recently learned about an instructional program that is getting results in other places, whether it's a core program or an intervention. And you think as a school administrator, if it's working over there, I want to bring that good stuff to my system. But what if you don't have the schedule that that program requires? What if your staff doesn't have the knowledge to implement that program correctly? What if it takes a grouping format that's not currently operational within your system? You aren't going to get the same results that that other school did because your local context is different. What if you take on that new program and everybody's burned out after the first year and they want to transfer to a different school because you have overwhelmed them in a way that can't be sustained? This is the reason to slow down and to take the time to do this very careful gap analysis before you put action planning in place. The collaborative improvement cycle will help you expand your thinking from student by student, one student at a time, solving problems student by student, to a much more broad systems perspective. Here's the non-reading example of this, which talks about if one of us on this call had a stomach ache, we would start asking questions and generating potential solutions that were about that individual. But if everybody in this meeting had a stomach ache, we would ask very different questions. We would come up with very different solutions because we would be approaching that circumstance not from a one-off individual perspective, but because of this larger systemic perspective. So this is where it's important for us to zoom out and use the collaborative improvement cycle to take a systems approach. In MTSS for Reading Improvement, the book that Sarah Brown and I published last May, we created half of the book to be a set of meeting agendas and data protocols for doing this collaborative improvement cycle. And you don't have to buy the book to access these materials. They're all available for download from the book website on the Solution Tree website. We organized these materials in two strands. This is important. Because of the inclination for people to fall back into talking about individual students, we organized the tools as Tier 1 materials and Tier 2 and 3 conversations and materials. So that in a Tier 1 meeting, you're using the Tier 1 agenda. You're using the Tier 1 gap identification and gap analysis protocols. And you are resisting the temptation to talk about individual students. That will come up in a Tier 2 meeting. This is how building leadership teams and grade level teams organize themselves and stay focused to use the minimal time that you have to get together in schools. So this is what the questions would look like as you move through the steps of the process: identifying the gaps, stating it in an observable and measurable way, then analyzing the gaps, using the protocols that you can download from our book's website. They're all there as PDFs, free for you to use. We give you the questions to ask. We give you the variables to analyze so that you can stay focused. Moving into that problem analysis step, so you can see tools for gap analysis, what the variables are to focus on in our experience, the high value targets. Coming up at the end of the gap analysis step with a hypothesis statement that leads you directly into your action plan. And then evaluating your actions not only in terms of student outcomes, but also in terms of the adult implementation. We all have been in meetings where we come up with a lofty plan and we walk away and it never gets implemented. And this is what we want to avoid. In the action planning meeting, I encourage you as a school leader to ask the question, what might go wrong? Here's what we think we should do. Here's the actions we think we should take. How can we support it to be true? What are the potential barriers? What are the pitfalls? How can we predict where it would go wrong? And then we proactively put things in place so that it doesn't go wrong. That's a role that's important for administrators to take. So you can see the action plans that we're suggesting are not complicated or in depth, just identifying the who, what, when, and where components. And then the evaluation of this is centered around not just the student outcomes, but also the adult behaviors. So I can see a question about how long the meetings should be. In my experience, it's typical to have between 20 and 40 minutes for a grade level team meeting about once a week. You might, as you're starting, need to stipend people to stay after school. This is, one of the places where administrators beg, borrow, and steal. Well, hopefully not steal, but beg and borrow time from other places to get creative, to free up the time for people to meet. In the first year of implementation, I think this is really important. We set up our tools to be agendas for about a 30-minute meeting. And you'll notice, if you get a chance to look at those tools, we don't expect that you're working from problem or gap identification to gap analysis and action planning in a single meeting. You can probably do gap identification and start gap analysis in a 30-minute meeting in your first year of implementation. Then in the next meeting, maybe next week, maybe 2 weeks from now, you can complete the gap analysis and start into action planning. Then you're going to implement your action plan, and you're going to come back months later, maybe at the middle of year screening time, to do the outcome evaluation step. So this is a series of meetings. It's not a single meeting by any stretch of the imagination. And I'm focusing on the grade level team meetings because I think that's where the important work happens. But same is true for the building and district level meetings. It's a series of meetings working through gap identification, gap analysis, writing the action plan, and evaluating it over time. So how often do you need to meet to accomplish getting to the action plan? In your first year, you probably need to give yourself, I'm going to say 4 30-minute meetings. And that is if you have established roles and everybody has had some form of introduction to this collaborative improvement cycle, some form of training on how to work together in this way, and you're using forms that keep you focused. Because if you don't have a meeting facilitator and you don't have a timekeeper and you don't have a note taker and you don't have a communication plan, you're going to spin your wheels having lots of conversations that are not, that are not effective in moving your school forward. Okay, so these are actions I would encourage you as school leaders to consider. Identifying somebody to be in this role of facilitator, accessing training for people who are on your team, for yourself and your colleagues, and to select a set of meeting agendas and protocols. You don't have to use the ones that Sarah and I put in our book. There are others. I mentioned the MTSS Center from American Institutes of Research, AIR. They have a set of procedures and materials. The Oregon RTII Center has a set of meeting agendas and materials. They are all very similar and they would all serve you well. Just pick a set of those and start to learn how to use them. Okay, fourth action for administrators is to install a school-wide assessment system. I'm going to be speaking to adopting assessments, but I want to start by saying don't pile on more and more assessments. We do too much testing already in schools. Be very mindful at the outset of what assessments might need to be de-implemented. How are you going to make room for taking on new assessments by removing some old, maybe familiar assessments, maybe beloved assessments that are no longer serving your teachers or your students? When I say assessment system, I'm referring to the 4 purposes of assessment that are necessary for having data that answers the questions you need to address when you're building an MTSS. Through the Ontario Literacy website, Una Malcolm has an excellent article, paper that she wrote about the four purposes of assessment. So it would be a great resource for you to use after this session if you want to go deeper into the purposes, how they are related, how they are different. So this is the same content from the keynote. I want to see what questions you have about universal screening. This is the crystal ball into the future. The purpose is not only identifying students who are not currently on track, but also identifying systems that need your support. Screening data in the aggregate, this is an image from Dibble's 8th through M-Class. Screening data will help you to pinpoint where should we prioritize our attention. So this is a picture that's showing you the percentage of students who need support overall on a composite, but also on the key indicators like phonemic awareness, like basic decoding, and so on. If you're in a context like this one, where half or more of the students need instructional support, this might be a grade level that your school prioritizes for implementing MTSS initially. You might not have the capacity to take this on in every grade, but your screening data will help you know, aha, this is an important grade level that we should start in. It will help you know what are the needs of this grade level as a whole, not trying to meet and solve the problem one student at a time. But I can see from these aggregate screening data, we have a huge problem in this grade level. It wouldn't be possible for us to intervene with half of the grade level. It wouldn't be possible for us to provide intervention that catches students up to half of the grade level. We're going to have to approach this from a perspective of curriculum and instruction in Tier 1 with additional support in intervention. So our Tier 1 is going to have to address the fact that 40% of our first graders can't segment phonemes, and 40% of our first graders can't match phonemes to graphemes. This is now shaping the way that we teach Tier 1 and informing the interventions we need in Tier 2 and 3. This is the grade level conversation. Diagnostic assessment goes deeper into the skill areas that have shown to be problematic for our students with our screening results. Progress monitoring is going to help us to know if our instructional systems are actually working, and working for whom? Working for individual students, working for all of our students. So the actions that I would encourage you to take are to, first of all, audit your current assessment system. There is a download related to this. I think there's one in both of the MTSS books that I mentioned. So on the Scholastic website, there's one, and on the Solution Tree website. It's a basic grid. It doesn't have to be more fancy than this for auditing your assessments, where you're putting the purpose down the left-hand side, screening, diagnostic, progress monitoring, and outcome evaluation. And then each column across the top is a grade level. And you're filling in what is the name of the tool that we use for universal screening of our fourth graders. What is the tool we use for diagnostic assessment of language comprehension with our kindergartners? You're filling in the tools that you currently have, and then you're noticing where you have duplication. This is a great opportunity to take something off your plate, de-implement where you have duplication, so that you are not piling on more and more and more assessments each year, but you're being thoughtful about taking away ones that are no longer meeting your needs. This kind of an audit tool will also help you see where you have gaps. I can predict from experience that you may not have diagnostic assessments of language comprehension. This is where I find people are in need of tools. That's why I mentioned the cubed assessment earlier and Acadian's reading diagnostic, CFOL or CFAL, comprehension, fluency, and oral language. So this big picture audit is a first step. I encourage you to sit down this afternoon and think through this as possible. Then the steps include things like, what are you going to swap out? Maybe you have a universal screening tool that's not very useful or effective. What criteria will you use for selecting a new one? Once you've made selections of your assessment tools, you're going to have to provide training. And this is an important job for school leaders to carve out the time and make available training for everybody in the system on the assessments that you're going to be using. And that training needs to involve not just how to give and score the assessment, but also how to interpret the results. This is an important step. If assessment is a compliance activity, check the box, we did it, and there is no training on how to use it. There's no time provided for folks to use the assessments in teams. You might as well not spend the time collecting the data. It's not useful to you. It's not getting in there to the classroom where it can have the maximum input and impact. So ahead of time, as you're making selections of assessments, make sure that you're factoring in the training and the time for using them. Many of you are probably in systems now where there are mandates about assessment, especially universal screening. You may be in a system where there is an approved list that you are supposed to choose from. Only assessments on this approved list can be used, or maybe they're the only ones that can be paid for you. I want to give you just a word of caution to make good choices. If you have a list of approved assessments, educate yourself about assessment purposes, educate yourself about what to look for, educate yourself about assessment characteristics, reliability, validity, and so on. This is not something that educators are often well trained on, and so you might not be any different in this regard. Get yourself some good, reputable, vetted information so you make a good choice. Once your system invests in an assessment, it's very hard to change course. So take the time at the beginning to make a good choice. Invest in yourself and your knowledge so that you make a good choice instead of having to undo something down the road that ends up to not be very effective for your students. Okay, some questions about assessment, and feel free to drop in the chat. Una Malcolm, is this the article? I'm not going to click on the link because I think it'll take me away from sharing my screen. So, Joanna, did you perhaps confirm that that is the article I was referencing?
I think it's just the title. I don't think it's actually linked. Like if I click on it, nothing happens. But it's called Evidence-Based Assessment in the Science of Reading. That's the title.
That sounds familiar to me. If somebody sources up the actual link and can drop that in the chat, that would be fantastic.
Okay, maybe Eric can do
If
that.
you Google purposes of assessment Una Malcolm, I'm pretty sure it'll pop up for you.
Okay.
And I think Una is speaking this afternoon. So for folks who don't know the amazing Una Malcolm, you will get introduced to her in a few short hours this afternoon.
Yeah, she is actually closing our day today, so make sure you stick around and hear what she has to say. Um,
Perfect.
we also have someone in the chat who asks, during the school-wide assessment topic, oh yeah, that was Una Malcolm. I had a question.
Yes.
In terms of, you talked about screening, and there's a lot of talking in our province about screening, for better or for worse. And I guess the question I had is, what would your take be or advice for people who want to create their own screening tool?
Huh. Uh, would you like to also repair your own car and do your own dental work? And no, 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 no. This is a task for experts. This is a high stakes task. Literacy is so high stakes and important for children's lives. We should not be making things up. I'm sort of shocked that this would be something that people would think that was possible. Maybe because I spent 12 years working for an assessment company, I have a very inside, up close view of how painfully difficult it is to create assessments, how slow the process is. Sure, you could make stuff up, but you don't know if it works. This is what takes assessment vendors years to research, decades to research. So, for example, does your made up screening tool actually predict future reading performance? How are you going to know until you have followed students for years to find out students who scored this way in first grade ended up scoring this way in fourth grade? You don't know that until you've followed them for a length of time. How do you know that your made up universal screening tool is actually measuring the construct that you think it is? You think it's a phonics assessment, but it might actually be measuring vocabulary or phonemic awareness or something unrelated to literacy altogether. How do you know that your made up universal screening tool is accurately sorting students into on track and not on track? How do you know that your made up universal screening tool can be aggregated to reflect the effectiveness of your classroom reading instruction? How do you know that your made up universal screening tool is something that teachers and parents can understand, take action on, and it will result in improved outcomes for students? Okay, that's just an off the top of my list, off the top of my head, quick list of what is problematic about this concept that you would make up your own screener. People have invested millions of dollars and decades of time to answer those questions. There are, at least that I know of, 2 free, excellent universal screening tools that have evidence for use for all the things I mentioned. One is Dibble's 8th edition. The other is Acadience Reading. Free download, both of them. Acadience Reading is the original Dibbles, unrelated to what's now called Dibbles 8. Download and use one of those. Don't spend your time or money trying to waste students' time with something that's unproven. Sorry, that was very pointed and direct, but I feel strongly about that.
I just think it's really important that we get an answer on that topic from someone who has the amount of expertise that you do when it comes to assessment, and that it really is a science that is, like you said, years in the making to make these valid and reliable tools. So I really appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to hopefully set that straight. It looks like Melanie has a hand up.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
I'm a high school principal. I was an elementary school principal for 7 years. Sorry, I had to do the math in my head. And I love all of this. I love talking literacy. It really is my jam. So you're really speaking to me. My question is, for the assessment, you were saying that they should be assessed every year. At the high school level, this year we used Dibbles for our 7s and our 8s to be able to guide resource. Now we're knowing that we also need to use it to guide the tier 1 instruction in
Yes.
class. And I was with 6 other teachers during the keynote, so we all had a ha-ha moment together. So thank you for that.
Great.
My question is, what about our grade 9, 10s, and 11s? Would you reassess the students that are struggling instead of reassessing everybody? Because I feel that our older students won't necessarily focus on the same things, and I'd love your input on that.
Yeah, thanks so much for asking this question. I'm so elementary and early years focused that I forget sometimes to clarify for secondary, especially high school, because I have different thoughts about high school screening. I'm not convinced that Well, let me start with universal screening in high school is not for the purpose of prevention. Students are already struggling. So it's a different purpose altogether. And you have years of data on your students, and you need to take a broader perspective on universal screening. Many people talk about this as, oh gosh, now the term is escaping me. Early warning systems is the term that you'll hear people describe for high school screening. You already have data about who's at risk. You have eighth grade spring screening results on every student who's coming to you as a ninth grader. Once they're in your high school system, you have grades as a really good early warning system. You have so number of D's and F's. You have attendance data as an early warning system about literacy, need for literacy intervention. You have, I'm not sure if this is true in Canada, but in the US, we have accountability assessments that students take in certain grades, like maybe eighth grade. It's everybody in the system
No,
takes
we
it.
have those in grade 6 and then in grade 10.
Okay, grade 10. So you have it as an early warning system. All of those data points are already pointing you to which students need literacy intervention. You don't need any additional data to tell you who needs literacy intervention. Okay, so maybe you don't need to do any screening with ninth graders at all. Unless they move into your system as an 11th grader, right? Then you could give them the eighth grade Dibbles 8th oral reading fluency assessment. You know, if they can't read the eighth grade stuff, then they need intervention. So that would be a way to respond efficiently and effectively in high school. If you are going to use the screening data the way I encourage folks to use it as program evaluation to evaluate the effectiveness of your tiered system, you need to know about everybody beginning, middle, and end of the year because you're looking for the percentage of students who are on track to increase across the year.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, hopefully that gets you started in a direction.
Yes, thank
Reference to accountability checks in grades 6 and 10. So that's a system-wide accountability assessment. MEQ exams, standardized
Yeah,
assessment.
those would be our MEQ exams, what Melanie was referring to in terms of just like the ministry standardized assessments that all students get at particular times. In terms of like that accountability check. And then Laura had a question about, is screening 3 times per year too much?
Maybe in high school, it's not needed. But in K to 8, I don't think it's too much. Because I think you need to be not only finding students who are at risk and what you're screening them on and the amount they need changes across time of year within those grades. And you should be doing program evaluation. So you should screen everybody 3 times a year. So my only exception to that is what I mentioned about 9 through 12. Okay, final action for school leaders is to build a tiered system of support. This is where I expect you might have some questions or comments about what I introduced in the keynote, because perhaps the way that I learned about a tiered model and the way that I've implemented a tiered model for decades is different from the way you're hearing other people talk about a tiered model. So I want you to use this opportunity to put your questions in the chat and make sure that at least you have a clear understanding of the way that I'm approaching this. Context matters. The reason to collect data on your students is so that you can build a coherent system of support that addresses every student's need. This is not a rigid application of the same thing in every grade or in every school. This is using student outcomes to and using the knowledge of your local context, your local resources, to build the system of support that gets 100% of your students on track. You should use the beginning of year screening data as your very most important indicator of the effectiveness and health of your Tier 1 instruction in the previous grade. And you should use the beginning to end of year improvement in the percentage of students who are on track as your indicator of should you repeat what you did last year or should you make a change? If you start with 60% of your students who are struggling, but you end with 80 some percent, well, you probably did something right and you should repeat it. But if you start with more than half of your students who need support, and at the end of the year, more than half still need support, you should think about making changes. So I want to give you an opportunity to ask questions about the tiers as I described them. Questions about Tier 1 as the foundation of all reading improvement efforts. Any questions you have about differentiating instruction for phonics and spelling in Tier 1. So this is what I was suggesting with the grade level planning, where rather than using screening data to send students off to intervention in Tier 2 or 3, that instead the grade level group of teachers and staff sit down to use screening data to assign students to skill-based groups that will replace the whole group phonics and spelling instruction in Tier 1 and will allow students to have a second dose of that same targeted skill-based instruction as their Tier 2 or 3 support. This is instead of students getting one program for phonics and spelling during Tier 1 time and getting a different phonics and spelling intervention that's happening in the resource room or when they get their special ed minutes or when they're with an MLL or SLP instructional environment. This is the alignment that is inherent in the tiered model. It all starts from the effective Tier 1 that is constructed in response to what students need. What they need is shown to you on the screening and diagnostic data that you collect, and using the Tier 1 instruction to reduce the amount of intervention that's needed in each grade. So any clarification about Tier 1? People often say to me, well, how will students catch up if they don't get the Tier 1 instruction? And this is where I remind people about word recognition and language comprehension. This is where I remind them how much resource is needed when it's already a reading problem, grades 2 to 12. Because you have to do that very time-intensive work of keeping students connected to the grade level curriculum for language comprehension. So you're doing that through read aloud and discussion, while at the same time you're building their word recognition skills. This is where literacy is going to consume your whole school day, or most of it, if you have lots of struggling readers. What is a para? Excellent question. You might call them prep teachers, maybe, or paraprofessional. You call them attendants. Okay, good. I know in different places we have different words. A non-certificated staff, it's usually in the US. Yours might be certificated staff members. They are not the lead teacher in the classroom. They are additional support educators. Yeah, we call them paraprofessionals. So I gave some descriptors of targeted intervention at Tier 2 and 3. You notice that my description of Tier 3 is essentially the same as my description of Tier 2. The point of this extra layer on top of Tier 1 is to accelerate progress. If your intervention systems, Tier 2 and Tier 3, are not catching up the majority of students who are receiving them, you probably need to revisit them. You need to have conversations in a team meeting or 2 or 6 about how you increase the effectiveness of your intervention system. We want to avoid the misunderstanding and sort of the make-believe concept that intervention can close the gap for students. This is, or should I say, intervention alone can close the gap for students. If you have a context where you're working in the intermediate grades or in high school, intervention alone is not going to catch students up. If you have a context in the primary grades where lots of students need intervention, more than 20%, or your context is that maybe fewer students, 40%, 60%, need intervention, but the range of skills is quite wide. Intervention alone is not going to close the gap. We need to move towards making sure students get what they need in Tier 1 and additional time targeted at the same skill deficit during intervention at Tier 2 or 3. So I shared a conceptual representation of this with the suggestion that the sooner you implement this intensive catch-up approach, the easier it will be, the less time it will take you to get everybody on track, and the less intensive the resource allocation will be. If you are in Melanie's situation as a high school administrator, you can close the gap even for high school students. There are many folks, one being my former doctoral student, Julie Brown, who are demonstrating how this can happen with secondary students who have big gaps in their literacy skills. Even if we aren't starting this until 9th or 10th grade, it can happen. But what I want you to recognize, it's going to happen only through devoting perhaps a great deal of time towards intervention during the school day and having a school-wide approach where every teacher recognizes that they play a role in literacy outcomes. Even the high school history teacher, biology and chemistry teacher, physical education teacher, music teacher, when it becomes a school-wide approach to solving the literacy crisis. That is what's required, most especially in the high school grades. The sooner we implement this catch-up approach to the tiered system, we can actually close the gap by the end of first grade. This is possible. Schools are doing it all around the world. We can get every student reading for meaning by the end of first grade, and then we don't have to do differentiated Tier 1 going forward. We can be much more efficient through whole group instruction once everybody is caught up. You as administrators are challenged by the schedule. This is a perennial, like hair-raising, mind-blowing challenge for every school leader. How do we find the time? So my suggestions here are to pick a grade, prioritize a grade. If you're a middle school, maybe 6th grade is your priority. If you're working with a high school, maybe 9th grade is your priority. Maybe the 2 years that your students spend in kindergarten, or maybe the first year of first grade is your priority. Start as early as you can and prioritize a grade to get this right. If you try to spread your resources thin across every grade, if you try to solve all the problems at once, you're going to be frustrated by not being able to get traction with any of it. Demonstrate effectiveness in one grade level first. Get some energy and excitement about the improvement in the outcomes that's possible, and then get everybody on board to spreading it around throughout the other grades. Get your feet wet with one grade first, demonstrate what's possible, get an improvement in outcomes, and then take it from there. So I've been sprinkling these throughout, but let me just revisit some ideas for you as school leaders related to building that tiered system. Just as I suggested an audit of your assessments, audit your tiers of instruction. What do you have available in each grade for providing and delivering Tier 1 instruction, what's available in each grade and in each skill area for intervention in Tier 2 and 3. Are you asking teachers to create their own lessons? Don't do that anymore. There are plenty of evidence-based instructional programs that are available for free or for purchase. You just need to educate yourself enough to be able to make good selections about those. As you're adopting new routines and programs, make sure you're taking things off teachers' plates. Don't keep piling more and more into an already packed school day. Be very intentional about supporting the de-implementation of those balanced literacy practices, the old, practices around leveled reading, guided reading, using centers and rotating through the teacher as a center. Make sure that you're supporting people to understand why those practices are not optimal, why you're moving away from them, and what you're doing instead. Adopting new programs is an important first step, but you're going to have to also provide training and coaching on those new programs and time for teachers to get together to chew on the implementation. How do we bring together the new program with the needs of our students? Which pieces of that program are we going to commit to? They are non-negotiable. We're going to deliver them every single day to each student for whom it's appropriate. And which pieces of it are nice to have? How are we going to support each other to implement the programs that do have a research base as they are designed? Okay, to wrap us up and move us forward here, I want to summarize with the same takeaway big ideas so that you as a school leader can bring these forward into the work that you're doing every day. Much is known about reading, how it develops, what can go wrong in that process, how to prevent things from going wrong, and how to support implementation in schools. Your job as the leader is not just to tell people what to do, but to really understand your local context and support the implementation of what's in the research in a way that's realistic and doable for the people in your system. I want to encourage you to focus on prevention if you're working in an elementary setting, and intervention, early intervention as soon as possible if you're working with older students. MTSS is not a rigid set of paperwork or procedures or hoops to jump through. It is a flexible framework for implementing what's already in the research. Your best opportunity for improving outcomes for all students is what and how you teach in the regular classroom in Tier 1. So here is a vetted set of potential next steps for you. I sequenced these with number 1 being first and number 2 being the next step if you already have number 1 in place. So this gives you some very concrete, specific actions to take in these 5 core component areas that sit at the base of that image of the MTSS triangle. Some ways for you to continue your learning and stay connected with me. I support 2 online communities, one specific to reading called the Reading Science Academy. Where's the second one? Here's the second one, which is about MTSS more broadly, not just reading, but also behavioral support, supporting math MTSS implementation. And this one is preschool through high school. Sarah Brown and I have a series of workshops about our book, MTSS for Reading Improvement. The next one coming up is in Portland, Oregon. Sarah and I also make available a set of book study materials that you can access about our MTSS for Reading Improvement book. And here is my email address, my website, where you can learn about all of these things and where to find me on social media. Looks like I might have missed a question. So let me go back here. Are there guidelines for how much improvement should be expected over time to help identify what routines and programs are more or less effective? In our Canadian context, we have students with intellectual disabilities in our classes as well. Those students tend to need more practice to progress. Are there guidelines for how much progress should be expected for this group as well? Yes, yes, and yes. As I mentioned, students with disabilities, intellectual disabilities, reading disabilities, students who are struggling readers who don't have identified disabilities have to make more progress in less time than students who don't have those challenges. This is one of the concepts behind MTSS. For them to make faster progress in less time, more of their day every day has to be devoted to reading. This means multiple doses of instruction or intervention each day that's lined up. So making sure that their schedule allows for that support to happen during tier 1 and in intervention. In the two screening systems that I mentioned, Acadience Reading and Dibbles 8, there are tools for measuring growth. In Acadience Reading, it's called Pathways of Progress. In Dibbles 8th edition, it's called Zones of Growth. They are essentially normative growth percentiles. They will tell you for every beginning of year score, including the beginning of year score for your students with intellectual disabilities, which might be quite low, how much growth across the school year is typical, so that you can metric the growth that you're actually achieving with students against what's typical for millions of other students around the world who had the same assessment. So that you're not trying to say as a blanket statement, all second graders should grow this much across the year, because the students who start low have to grow more. And this will help you evaluate the instructional support systems, tier 1, 2, and 3, that you are providing for your students. It'll give you a normative way of indexing the growth that you're getting, so that you can see if it's not sufficient, you need to provide additional support to those students. Okay, I think that is taking us right up to our break time. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if there are final words from our conference hosts or closing comments from anybody. Thank you all so much for your time today, and thank you for the work you're doing on behalf of your students. I'm really impressed with all of you attending today and with the content of this conference. So I hope you enjoy the rest of it this afternoon.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Stollar, for sharing your expertise with us today. And thank you to everyone here for joining us and engaging with questions and very thoughtful comments. We will have the resources and potentially other resources available post-conference. We'll be in touch with you about that. So it is now, like Dr. Stoller said, our lunch break, which will happen from 12 to 1 p.m. So I hope to see you back here for the next block of breakout sessions from 1 to 2:30. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great lunch.